This video is meant to give an overview to a basic CAD drafting in Igems. So for somebody who's never worked with CAD before, this is who this is targeted at. If you've already worked with CAD, you'll be familiar with many of the concepts that are in this video. So when you first open up Igems, this is the screen that you're at. At the top, you've got these different tabs depending on which modules that you've purchased. CAD tab is generally where you'll start off. Across the top here on this ribbon, we've got most of your basic commands that you might use. And then on any of these menus, if you hover over this area here, the name of the menu, it'll show if there's a submenu, if it kind of changes its shape there, or the highlight. So they're less common commands underneath these submenus. Down in the lower right-hand corner, you've got a few buttons. Snapping button, I'll talk about that in a moment. Ortho button, color, and then this button here is if you have multiple files open, you can switch between different files that are open, and then a help button. So if you're in the midst of a command, you can click on the help button, and then it'll bring up the help documentation. So across the top here, parametric shape library. If you click on this, it's a handy way to be able to just quickly make some standard shapes very quickly. So if you want to do something like a rectangle for bolt holes, you can double click on that, and then you can go through and plug in your various dimensions as indicated in the sketch over here. So once you've plugged in your different dimensions, you can click on the single button, and then you can left click and put it into your work area here. And then the mouse, talk about that here briefly. If you have a scroll wheel on your mouse, you can roll your scroll wheel forward, backwards to zoom in and out. If you're zoomed way out, if you double click, it'll zoom extents. Same thing if you're zoomed way in, double click and it'll zoom extents. If I hold down on my scroll wheel, I can pan around. And then there's also these buttons up here that you can use if you want to do things like zoom extents and pan and such, but mouse is a quick and easy way to do that. So we'll talk about snaps here briefly. So if I turn this button on, this activates snaps. Snaps allow you to, for example, if I want to draw a line and I want to draw it from, say, the midpoint of this line, if I turn on my snaps, if I have certain snaps activated, right now I've got my endpoints snap activated. So you see when I hover near the end of a line, that yellow box shows up showing me that that's the endpoint of a line. And if I click, it'll draw the line from that endpoint. If I did want to do something from the midpoint, I currently don't have the midpoint snap activated. So if it's something that I'm going to use frequently, if I right click down here, I can check this box here, and now my midpoint snap will be a default snap that's selected. And there are these other snap points that you can choose. So now if I go to draw a line and I want to draw from midpoint to midpoint, when I hover near the midpoint of a line, that yellow triangle will show up, and then I just left click, and then I move over to the other midpoint that I want to draw to, and then I left click again. And then when I'm done drawing my line, I hit enter. So I could do something similar from the top to the bottom, start my line command, and midpoint to midpoint. So left click, and then enter when you're done. And then if there's a snap that you want to use that is not one of your defaults that you've turned on, maybe one that you're not going to use frequently, so you haven't turned it on. So for example, if I want to draw a circle and I want to do it at the intersection, I've already got midpoint turned on, but I can also choose. So if I start my circle command down here at the bottom, it's asking me to specify center. So if I right click, I can then also choose all these different snap points. So I could choose intersection, and then when I hover near this intersection here, I can lock in on that intersection. And then with the circle command, as I start that, it's going to prompt me to specify diameter. So if I wanted to make this a 6-inch diameter, I would just type that. If you're doing the circle command, and again, if I do intersection, if I prefer to specify a radius, I would press R on my keyboard. And if I wanted to make it a 8-inch radius, I would just type that in. So that's basically how the snap points work. The other button down here is the ortho command. So ortho only lets you either draw lines, remove, or copy things in 90-degree increments. And then actually in WordCam, Actually, in Igems, you can specify different angles. So if you want to be able to move things in only 45-degree increments, you can specify that. So we'll stick with the normal 90 degrees. So if my ortho button is turned on and I want to draw a line, and I go from, say, this midpoint here, so I bring my mouse across, you'll see that that line is only going to go either 90 degrees that way, or if I move my mouse up this way, 90 degrees this way, or this way. So it limits what angles that you can draw your lines at. And then if I click down here again, it'll turn that off. As you hover over these buttons, you can see you can press F8, F9 to turn ortho and snap on and off. The next button over there is color. So if for ease of drafting you want to change color of a line, you can select a line or a geometry, click on this button here, and then you can choose a different color for that entity. So sometimes when you're drafting, it's helpful to use different colors to separate different things. And then, as I mentioned, this button here allows you to switch between different drawings. And then if you click on the help button, it'll bring up your help documentation. Through a couple different other basic commands here that you'll use a lot. So if I want to delete something, I can just click on it, and then I can either press delete on my keyboard, or there's also a erase command or delete command underneath this modify menu. Also for selecting, a couple ways of selecting entities. So you can directly click on something to select it. Sometimes if you want to select multiple things, it's easier to drag a box around it. If I left click and then I drag my mouse to the right, anything that I'm trying to select has to be entirely within the box. So if I'm trying to select this circle here and I'm dragging this box to the right, the entity has to be entirely within this box. So if I were to click here, it's not going to select anything because nothing is entirely within the box. Oh, sorry, except for that line there. That was entirely in there. If I left click again, come across, and now I left click, then it's going to get both the circle and the line. If you want to deselect something, so say for example we wanted to delete that line but we didn't want to delete the circle, if I hold down my shift key, I can then click or use whatever select tool and deselect what I didn't mean to select. So if I actually wanted this one here, again I can just click on that and hit the delete key. If you are dragging from right to left, entities just have to be basically touching the box. So if I just drag a box, I left click, and then I drag my box and I left click again, then it's going to select that circle because it was crossing that box. So if I left click and then left click again, then it gets both of those lines. Whereas if I go from left to right, again, it's not going to select those because they aren't entirely within the box. So that's the difference between dragging a box from left to right versus right to left. Here, any of these commands, if you hover over these and you see that there's the little hint that pops up there, you can just press that letter on the keyboard to do that command. So if you want to draw a line, you can either click on this, or you may find it faster just to press L on your keyboard, and then you'll see down at the bottom it's prompting you for the first point for the line. So then again, if I want to draw a line from here to here, I can do click there for that point, or I can click there for that point. That's all well and good if you've got geometries that you can choose snap points and things to draw lines. If you're just drawing a line and you want to make it a specific length, so I'll start my line command again. So if I want to just draw a 6-inch line, down at the bottom, it's prompting me for first point. I can left click, and then it's prompting me for next point. So I want to make a 6-inch line, I can just type 6, and if I want that line to go 6 inches directly to the right, I can just click on this 0 degree button, and it'll go 6 inches to the right. And then if I wanted to go 12 inches up, I just start typing 12, this dialog box comes up, and I can indicate the direction I want to go. If I wanted to make this a triangle, I want to come back down to here. Again, I can just hover down here. Since my endpoint snap is selected, I can click and put that line in there and then hit enter. Similar thing with the rectangle command. So start my rectangle command, prompts me for first corner. So if I click here, Then it wants to know opposite corner. So if I wanted to make this a 12 by 12 rectangle, I just start typing on my keyboard. I type 12, comma, 12. Now since this relative box is selected, it's going to be 12 inches and 12 inches in X and Y from wherever I did that first click, which is normally how you're going to want that. If that box had not been clicked, so if I do this again, click here, and I do 12, comma 12, and I uncheck this box, then this endpoint is going to be relative to the absolute 0 point on my screen, which puts it over there, which ultimately is probably not what I really wanted, so I could just delete that. You've also got undo and redo commands up here. So if I had done done that, I can do undo to get rid of it if I don't want to delete. You've got redo here. If you want to add any of these buttons up here to this quick access toolbar, you can just right click and click on add quick access tools, and then it'll always be up there. Another command that I find quite useful is the measure tool, which is found under the info submenu. So you can click on the info button there and then go down to space, or you can press Control D on your keyboard. And if I wanted to measure this square here, click on this corner, click on this corner. Since my snaps are on, it picks those corners. And then down here at the bottom, we see that it's 12 inches in X, 12 inches in Y, and then the 16.97 would be the diagonal across there. So do the same thing on the triangle, info, and then measure command, click here, and we can see it's 6 inches in X and 12 inches in Y. And again, this is another one of those buttons that I always add up to my quick access toolbar because it's a command that I use quite a bit. There's also this dimensioning tool here, which is helpful. So if you click on this, and then if I want to put a dimension on this line here, as I hover near that, you can see that entire line is red. So I can click there and then put my dimensions on there. If I wanted to take a different type dimension, so I want to take a dimension from midpoint of here and over to here somewhere, so I can start my dimension command, and I'll right click and I'll do midpoint of here, and then we'll take it perpendicular to this line here, which ends up being up there. So then you can find that that's 1.2 if you go that way, or 2.4 if you're going in the x-axis. So as you move your mouse around, it'll give you the option of whether you want to do the x or the y or the diagonal for that dimension. Also, underneath the dimensions submenu, you've got other options if you want to do a diameter, so you can dimension a circle, or you can do a radius if you prefer to know what the radius is. Angles, if you click on the dimension style, then you can define things like how large you want that text to be. So if you want to make that text a little bit bigger, how many places after the decimal you want displayed, and that'll update once you change that. So in future videos, I'll go through each of these different commands here, just short little videos that show you how each of these commands work. If you have any questions, let us know. Thanks.